Under the blinding studio lights, Michael B. Jordan sat in the guest chair, his back straight, but his palms slightly damp against the smooth armrests. The air was chilled, dry from the overworked ventilation system, but his skin prickled with warmth beneath the tailored suit. He could smell the mix of coffee, stage makeup, and the faint metallic tang of the microphones. Across from him, the host, a man in his early 60s with neatly combed silver hair and an overconfident smirk, leaned back in his chair, holding a cue card between his fingers like a weapon disguised as paper. "So, Michael," the host began, his tone syrupy sweet but carrying that undercurrent of mockery Michael had heard 1,000 times before. "You've done pretty well for yourself. Must be nice. Hollywood really loves a good redemption story." The audience chuckled lightly, unsure whether to laugh or not. Michael forced a polite smile, jaw tightening. "Redemption story?" he asked softly, tilting his head. "Did I miss a fall from grace somewhere?" The host's eyes gleamed. "Oh, you know," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "You people always have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Isn't that what they say? But hey, you're proving the system works, right?" A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the audience. Michael's chest tightened, and for a split second, the words, "you people," echoed in his head like a siren. He felt the cold edge of anger cut through the warmth of the lights. He breathed in through his nose, catching the scent of the leather chair and the faint cologne the host wore. Something old-fashioned, overpowering, almost arrogant. "I just work hard," he replied evenly. "That's all there is to it." "Of course," the host said with a condescending smile. "And it's paying off. You're the exception that proves the rule." The laughter came louder this time. Michael's heart thudded, and he could hear his pulse in his ears. He smiled again, practiced, professional, but his right hand gripped the chair's armrest tightly enough for his knuckles to pale. Cameras rolled, and every second felt longer than it should. When the commercial break light finally blinked red, Michael exhaled. The host leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Don't look so serious, son. It's just entertainment." Michael looked at him, really looked, saw the lines of arrogance carved into his face, the smug ease of someone who had never been questioned. He wanted to respond, to say something sharp, but the producer signaled 5 seconds till live again. He swallowed his pride, straightened up, and forced another smile. The interview continued, but every joke the host made after that landed like a slap. When it ended, applause filled the room, hollow and metallic. Backstage, the air felt heavier. Technicians moved quickly, voices echoing off the concrete walls. Michael walked slowly toward the exit door, the murmur of the audience fading behind him. He caught sight of his reflection in a metal surface, composed, dignified, but tired. He thought of his father's voice from years ago. "Don't ever let them see you break, son. They'll call it weakness, but you'll know it's control." He nodded to himself and kept walking. Later that night, in his apartment, the city lights spilled through the window, painting his living room in fractured orange and blue. He sat on the couch, still in his suit, staring at the blank television. His phone buzzed, texts from friends, fans, reporters. "What the hell was that host's problem? Man, you handled that with class. They did you dirty on that show." He turned the phone face down and closed his eyes. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books, grounding him. He replayed every moment in his head, every smirk, every laugh. His anger simmered quietly, controlled but alive. The next morning, he went for a run. The city was still half asleep, fog rolling off the streets. The rhythmic thud of his shoes on pavement matched the beat of his thoughts. He thought about what had happened, how casual it was, how familiar it felt. A stranger's power to humiliate you in public and still smile while doing it. He remembered being younger, fresh out of drama school, told by a casting director that he didn't have the look for leading roles. You're too urban, they said. He remembered swallowing that same anger then too. That day at the studio had just reopened something buried deep. At the coffee shop afterward, he overheard two men at the next table. He should have laughed it off, one said. That host's a legend. The other shrugged. Yeah, but still, you people, that was kind of messed up. You can't say anything anymore, the first man replied. Everybody's so sensitive. Michael stirred his coffee silent. The cup was warm in his hands, grounding him, but his stomach twisted. The smell of roasted beans suddenly felt bitter. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The world always had an opinion when it wasn't their dignity at stake. Days passed, and the clip began circulating online. Social media buzzed. Host crossed the line. Michael B. Jordan handled that like a king. Maybe he overreacted. Was it even racist? Everyone had a take. Everyone but Michael. He didn't post, didn't comment. He kept silent, but the silence started to feel heavy, like complicity. When his publicist called, she spoke carefully. Michael, people want your side. It might help to make a statement. What would I say? He asked. That I'm tired? That it happens more often than anyone realizes? She hesitated. Just something calm. Professional. He hung up gently, without anger, just quiet resolve. That evening, he went out to his balcony. The city hummed below, endless motion. The wind smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. He thought about dignity, how it wasn't silence, it was choice. To hold your ground, even when they tried to take it from you piece by piece. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the look in the host's eyes, disdain wrapped in charm. The next day, he was back at the studio, not as a guest but as a man who refused to disappear quietly. He walked through the hallway, the same hum of machines and chatter filling the air. The producer froze when he saw him. Michael, you're not on the schedule, I know, he interrupted. His voice was calm, deep, steady. I'm here to talk. The producer stammered. I'll get Mr. Hastings. Minutes later, the same silver-haired host appeared. His expression was puzzled, then amused. Michael, he said, chuckling, what brings you back? Forgot your pride backstage? The words hit like a slap, but Michael didn't flinch. I came to tell you something, he said. The crew around them went quiet. The hum of lights buzzed faintly overhead. You don't get to talk to me like that. Not anymore. Not on camera. Not off it. The host laughed lightly, trying to defuse it. Oh, come on now, it was a joke. You actors, so sensitive. You called me you people, Michael said, stepping closer. And you meant it? The host blinked, his smirk faltering for the first time. I was entertaining. No, Michael said. You were reminding everyone watching that you think men like me don't belong where you sit. But here's the truth, you don't get to decide that. The silence in the studio deepened. Technicians stood frozen, eyes darting. The air was electric. Michael turned, ready to leave, when the host muttered, You should be grateful I even had you on. Michael stopped. His shoulders tensed, but his voice stayed calm. Gratitude, he said quietly, is earned, not demanded. I was raised to thank people who show respect, not people who disguise hate as humor. And then he walked out. Cameras had still been rolling, unbeknownst to most of the crew. The clip leaked within hours. By evening, it was everywhere. Michael B. Jordan confronts racist TV host. Live TV showdown shocks viewers. The host tried to defend himself, claiming, context, jokes, overreactions. But the world had heard enough excuses. Within days, sponsors pulled out. The network suspended the show, pending review. But Michael stayed silent again, not from fear this time, but from peace. In interviews that followed, others spoke for him. He said what so many of us never could. He didn't yell. He just stood there, and that was louder than anything. A week later, he went for another morning run. The city air was clearer after rain, the streets glistening with reflections. He passed a group of young men at a bus stop. One of them lifted a hand, half shy. "Hey, Mr. Jordan," he said. "Respect, man. For standing up." Michael nodded, breath steady. "Appreciate that." He kept running, the sound of his footsteps merging with the pulse of the waking city. Inside, something had shifted. Not anger, not victory, but clarity. Later, at home, he sat again on the couch where it all began, the light softer now, the silence warm. He opened his phone and typed a single message on social media. "Dignity isn't silence. It's knowing when to speak." He stared at the words, then hit post. Hours later, the comment section overflowed, not with noise, but gratitude. He smiled faintly and leaned back, eyes closing. In his mind, he saw the host's face fade, replaced by countless others, faces that had looked down, looked away, or looked through. He realized then that his stand wasn't just against one man. It was for every quiet moment someone like him had swallowed the same pain. And as the night deepened, Michael felt something rare: stillness without surrender, peace without forgetting. The city breathed outside, and he breathed with it, finally, freely, on his own terms. The days following the confrontation blurred into a quiet storm of headlines, interviews, and think pieces, yet Michael stayed still in the center of it, like the calm eye that understood too well the chaos surrounding him. The world had turned his moment of dignity into spectacle, his silence into narrative, his composure into clickbait. He walked through Los Angeles streets that buzzed with gossip disguised as admiration, felt the eyes on him at coffee shops, in elevators, in restaurants, some approving, some skeptical, some pitying. He had never wanted to be a symbol, but symbols are rarely born by choice. At night, he would scroll through his phone, watching the host's face plastered across screens, clips of his calm defiance replayed endlessly. Commentators debated whether it was bravery or overreaction. 1,000 opinions, and none of them asked how it felt to sit there and be diminished on live television. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the city's hum bleeding through the glass, and thought about how dignity was always something he had to defend, never something he was freely given. The next week, he was invited to a press conference for a film he'd been promoting before the incident. Reporters filled the room, like vultures cloaked in professionalism. The air was thick with perfume, camera flashes, and the scent of plastic chairs warmed under the lights. One journalist with a tight smile asked, "Michael, do you think calling out racism publicly risks alienating your audience?" He felt the question like a bruise pressed again. "If truth alienates them," he said evenly, "then they were never mine to begin with." The room went quiet for a beat before the next barrage of questions came, and he answered each one calmly, his tone measured, his breathing steady. But inside, something was unraveling, not his resolve, but his patience. After the conference, his publicist caught up with him backstage. "You were brilliant," she said, voice quick, eyes flicking toward the waiting cameras outside. "But the studio's nervous. They're afraid of controversy." "Controversy?" he echoed, tasting the word. "For telling the truth?" She looked down. "You know how it works, Michael." "Yeah," he said softly. "I do." That night, he met with his old acting coach, Jameson, a wiry man with a deep, rasping voice and a face carved by time. They sat in a dim jazz bar downtown, smoke curling through the air, soft trumpet notes filling the silence between them. "You did right," Jameson said, tapping the rim of his glass. "But right doesn't always pay well in this town." Michael smirked faintly. "You think I care about pay right now?" I think you care about being heard, Jameson replied. But don't confuse the noise around you with being understood. They'll cheer for you 1 week and question you the next. Keep your compass steady. Michael nodded, watching the condensation slide down his glass. The scent of whiskey mixed with the faint perfume of the woman singing on stage. Her voice was low, aching, a song about surviving without apology. It cut through him in a way no headline could. When he returned home, messages from the network waited for him. They wanted a sit-down with the host, a reconciliation special, live, for ratings disguised as healing. He read the offer twice, feeling something cold settle in his chest. They didn't want understanding, they wanted performance. He stared out the window at the city again, lights flickering like nervous eyes, and whispered to himself, "Not this time." Days passed, and the story only grew. Protesters gathered outside the network building, holding signs, chanting for accountability. Michael didn't attend. He didn't need to. His presence had already been felt. Yet he couldn't ignore the guilt creeping in, the fear that people were standing for him when he'd rather they stood for themselves. He spent long hours walking the streets, hood pulled low, the air cool against his skin. He'd stop at a diner he used to frequent before fame, order black coffee, and sit by the window watching strangers pass. Sometimes someone would recognize him and whisper. He'd nod politely, then go back to his thoughts. One evening, a waitress approached, hesitant but kind-eyed. "You did the right thing," she said softly, setting down his bill. "My son saw that clip. Said it made him feel proud." Michael smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said, and when she walked away, he felt tears prick his eyes for the first time in weeks. It wasn't for himself. It was for every boy who had ever been told to laugh at what hurt him. The next day, his agent called. "Michael, the studio's cutting your next project," he said, voice apologetic. "They're saying it's creative differences, but you and I both know it's punishment." Michael finished. Silence hung on the line. "You'll bounce back," his agent said finally. "You always do." He hung up and sat in his kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator humming the only thing keeping him company. He thought of all the years he'd spent building a career with precision, always polite, always professional, always unthreatening. And for what? To be told he was too vocal when he finally spoke truth. Later that evening, his friend and fellow actor Darius came by unannounced. "You look like hell," Darius said, dropping onto the couch. "You gonna let them silence you now?" Michael chuckled. "I'm just tired." "Then rest. But don't stop. You know what they're scared of, right? Not your words. You're calm. You didn't yell, and that made them look worse." Michael looked up, meeting his friend's gaze. "You think any of this changes anything?" "It already has," Darius said. "You cracked their comfort." The next week, Michael received an invitation to a university panel on race and media. He hesitated but eventually agreed. The auditorium was packed, students, professors, journalists, all waiting for him to speak. When he took the stage, he didn't bring notes. "They told me I overreacted," he began. "They told me to be grateful, to smile, to forgive. But here's what I've learned. Gratefulness isn't silence. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. And professionalism isn't pretending you're not hurt." The room was silent. Every word echoed. "Dignity," he continued, "isn't given. It's claimed. And every time someone tries to take it from you with a joke, or a look, or a word like you people, you have two choices: laugh along or stand your ground." He paused, looking at the faces before him, young, hopeful, uncertain. "I chose to stand. Not because I wanted to make noise, but because I wanted peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you know you didn't let them define you." The applause was thunderous, but he didn't smile. He just nodded, quietly, and left the stage. Backstage, a student approached him, a young man trembling slightly. "Mr. Jordan," he said, "I'm studying journalism. I've wanted to speak up about things I've seen, but I was scared." Michael looked at him, really looked, and said, "Then start with truth. It's the only thing worth risking for." As he walked out into the night, the cool air hit him like clarity. The moon hung low, a pale eye watching over a restless city. But peace never came easy. The next morning, the network issued a statement. The host would be returning to the air after sensitivity training. The phrasing made Michael's stomach twist. He turned off the TV, sat in silence. Later that day, his manager called again. "They're inviting you to join the show's return episode. Reconciliation. You shake hands, talk about moving forward. It'll play well." Michael laughed bitterly. "Play well," he repeated. "That's what this is to them. A scene. I'm just saying it could help rebuild bridges." "Bridges to where?" he asked quietly. "The same old room where I'm not seen?" His manager sighed. "I can't tell you what to do, but you're risking your career." Michael looked out his window, at the horizon glowing with late sunlight. "If my career depends on silence," he said, "then it's not worth keeping." That night, he drafted a letter. Not to the press, not to the network, but to the people who'd written him, the ones who'd said his words mattered. He wrote about pain without bitterness, about courage that doesn't roar, about how standing up can feel like falling. He ended it simply. "If they can laugh at your dignity, make them listen to your silence." When the letter was published the next day, it spread faster than any scandal ever had. It wasn't loud. It was raw, precise, human. Critics called it transformative. Others called it naive. But for those who read it and felt seen, it was truth. Weeks later, the host returned to TV, looking older, stiffer, forced to apologize with words written by someone else. Michael didn't watch. Instead, he met with a group of young black filmmakers at a small community center in Inglewood. The place smelled of paint and dust, the walls covered in posters of forgotten revolutionaries. "We're tired of waiting for permission," one said. "Then don't wait," Michael replied. "Tell the stories they're afraid of." He offered his support, his name, his presence, not as a star, but as a man who'd walked through fire and decided it wasn't enough to survive. He had to build something new from the ashes. Over the following months, he began producing a small independent documentary about dignity, ordinary people, everyday acts of resistance, quiet strength. He interviewed janitors, teachers, nurses, people whose names wouldn't trend, but whose courage kept the world turning. Each story felt like a salve on his own wounds. But one night, as he watched early footage, the same question returned: had anything really changed? The system was still there, polished and smiling, waiting for the next scandal to feed on. He sat in the editing room, lit only by the glow of the monitor, and thought about that first night on the show, the smirk, the laughter, the sting. He whispered to himself, "You're still here. That's change enough." But fate had other plans. A few days later, an anonymous insider leaked footage from behind the scenes of that infamous night. It showed the host laughing off complaints, mocking viewers, saying, "He should be grateful we gave him airtime." The internet erupted again, this time with fury. The network had no choice. The host was fired. The story closed where it began, but this time, the ending wasn't his burden. Michael didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He went for a walk through the park, the scent of cut grass in the air, children playing nearby. For the first time in months, he felt light. But deep inside, he knew victory wasn't in someone else's downfall. It was in knowing he hadn't bowed. Later that night, Darius called. "Man, you hearing the news? He's done." Yeah, Michael said quietly. You feel vindicated? No, he replied. Just free. The line went silent for a while, both men understanding what that meant. When the call ended, Michael stepped onto his balcony, looking out over the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles. The same city that had tested him, twisted him, and now finally, silently, respected him, not with applause, but with acknowledgement. He breathed in deeply, feeling the cool night air on his skin. Somewhere far below, a car horn blared, laughter echoed, life went on. And he thought, maybe that was the point, not to win, not to be vindicated, but to live with your head high when they tried to push it down. That was dignity. That was everything. Weeks later, Michael sat quietly on a talk show couch again, but this time, it wasn't to defend himself or confront anyone. The host, a young woman with kind eyes, introduced him with respect in her voice. Tonight, she said, we're talking about what dignity really means. The applause was gentle, genuine. Michael smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the moment, but also its lightness. It means knowing your worth even when others pretend not to see it, he said softly. It means standing up, not to fight, but to remind the world that you belong. The audience was silent, listening. He could feel their breath in the stillness. For the first time, the lights didn't feel harsh. They felt warm. After the show, as he walked out into the cool night, he saw a young man waiting by the door, holding a small sign that read, Thank you for not staying silent. Michael paused, met his eyes, and nodded. You keep speaking too, he said. Then he walked away into the city glow, the air filled with the hum of traffic and life, knowing that his fight had become something larger than himself, a quiet revolution born from one word spoken in truth.